what is the saddest thing to me is the software companies say, done for you,
Yep.
right? We handle it all, but they don't.
Mm-mm.
They'll file the returns, they'll calculate the tax, but you have to tell them what your products are. You have to know whether or not they have the right content in their database or not. And if you don't have the knowledge to know what you don't know, you're setting yourself up for problem after problem after problem and profit loss after profit loss after profit loss.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the SALTovation podcast. We have one of our favorite guests back with us today, the lovely Diane Yetter, our first four-timer guest. And so we are just so honored to have her back with us again and to still, have her as our friend and colleague and our four-timer guest. So welcome back, Diane. It's great to have you again.
Thank you. It's great to be with both of you. Always wonderful to see you.
And as a repeat guest, we've discussed some of your background, but for those who might be new to our show, can you explain a little bit about your career and your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I have only ever worked in the sales tax field. So scary to say I've now been doing that for 41 years. So I started when I was very, very young. I started in state government as an auditor for the state of Kansas. I then went in-house at a manufacturing company. That's what moved me from Kansas to Chicago, and spent some time in public accounting. And 30 years ago started my firm. So it has been...
Is this your 30th anniversary, 2026?
It is.
Nice.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Amazing. Congratulations. That's a proud moment.
So over my entire career, I have had a strong focus on tax technology. Long before the title was, I'm a tax technologist. I like to think I'm the OG tax technologist. So the very first thing I did with tax technology, I was an intern back in 1985, summer after I graduated college. And I was working at a company and they accepted a lot of exemption certificates. And I created an exemption certificate management solution using Lotus 123. So that was my first foray into that. And I've done a lot of different things, and including, when I started my firm, that was really the bulk of what we were doing, implementing tax systems for the largest companies in the world, which was, amazing. I was a company of two people, and we were handling the global tax transaction tax implementations for a worldwide manufacturer, and we were putting in their systems for that for consumers use tax back in 96, 98, when you were trying to fit the sales tax system to make it do consumers use tax. So
yep.
So that's
I still feel like we're doing that today, 30 years later sometimes. So
but at least they have
automatable.
At least they have the fields labeled as, vendor and, purchase and things like that. So I had to tell people, don't assume that the field that's customer has to be vendor, because the vendor isn't the most important thing. When you only have two fields you can use, the vendor isn't one of the two most important things. So I've been doing all of that. Today we focus on really making sure, because, now there's so many solutions that are out there, making sure that the companies we work with get the right solution, and then we help implement it and help maintain it. So that is a lot of what I'm doing these days on the technology side. But I've also really been involved in training. So from the time I was at the state and all the way through every different position I've had, training has been a significant part of what I have done, and also it's where my real passion is. And so
Yeah.
when I started my firm, back then the only place you could get sales tax training was through IPT. And I said, well, that's great if you're a full-time sales tax person and you're
Yeah.
going to be a member of IPT. But what about the hundreds of thousands of millions of people that aren't, that need to know
Yeah.
sales tax? And so that's why I started Sales Tax Institute. So that was part of my original business plan. We had our very first class in 1997. So been doing that for basically the whole 30 years. And so that is a lot of what I do. We have our live in-person classes, our live online classes. We have monthly webinars, we have on-demand webinars. And then, we created back in 2020 our Sales Tax Nerd. And so I do have our little sticker here. We're the Sales
I
Tax
remember
Nerd.
getting it. It
So,
was at the Vertex conference at the Gaylord in Colorado. You remember that? We were both speaking, and I remember you had your cute thing. I'm like, I want to be a sales.
That is what we do. So it is, a community to educate professionals about sales tax. We'd love to have more of your listeners join us. We're going to drop a discount code for any of our classes into the show notes. So you'll be able to join us and check out what we do. And now, I've got an amazing team that helps us support all of our clients. And so what I'm doing a lot right now in my career, I've kind of progressed that I am involved in a lot of different organizations to help simplify sales tax across the country. So streamlined MTC, cost, IPT, Chicago Tax Club, Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, and others. And just really find that I've kind of gotten into a great space where I can explain these things that we need to do and actually help, dare I say, influence some of what is happening.
You can't forget about testifying in Congress more than once. So
it's a pretty big deal.
I just added just a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Kansas House of Representatives Tax Committee, and I wouldn't say I was testifying, but I was presenting to them. And so that was a great experience. So now I've got the federal Senate and now a state house. So it has been it's been great being asked to do those things and having a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. I've only done the state level, the coalition, and then I've been asked to testify. I remember years ago getting asked to testify about our vendor fee because we took it away because it's not mandatory. So they needed to do some budget stuff. So they took our vendor fee away in Colorado. And I think we're still kind of don't have it, but we took it away for a brief period of time. And we were trying to tell the legislators how much money that was going to cost the taxpaying community, because it's a little entitlement that offsets these giant amount of compliance they have to do. I mean, our return by hand in Colorado is this thick.
I know.
Like pages, right? So it's been replaced electronically, but you print that baby out, it's a big old return. So I don't think the legislators understood that. And so we're like, this is real money to like Verizon and especially big remitters of sales tax. Taking away that fee was like a budget line item on their P&L. So they're going to have a cost. That's what's going to hit it. Right. So I don't know. It's always very interesting how there's a little disconnect between, I think there's a lot of this technology is going to solve, Wayfair could go into place because technology is going to solve it. I beg to differ, and we need to talk about caution there. Yeah. But it's important to have the SME, which you are, subject matter expert, speaking there, because I don't really feel like they're trying to solve problems, but they don't really understand the practical side of what these laws represent to the taxpaying community. So,
and I think that's kind of the perfect kind of transition into where we were going to start, is to talking about like, why do you think that sales tax has just become more and more complicated for retailers and businesses, right? Because everyone wants to talk about technology and how it's going to make your life easier. That was, kind of an argument in Wayfair. You have all these ability, you have this ability to do all of these things, but is that really what's happening to our businesses?
Yeah. Well, I think, clearly the first answer anybody should be giving is Wayfair, right? It is, that case 2018, open the floodgates of responsibility for businesses, not just across the United States, but across the world. And so I think that is the number one. My number two is the reduction in federal funds going to states, and the states
Uh-huh.
having to come up with different sources of revenue, and not just the states but also the localities. So whether
Yes.
it's the states, the counties, the cities, every level is getting less money from the level above it.
Yep.
And so how are the states doing that? Well, sales tax, when it first started back in the 30s and 40s, what we bought was physical. It was tangible.
Mm-hmm.
That's what was taxed. Today, a fraction of what we spend our money on is actually anything tangible. And
Yeah.
states that have not shifted their tax base to accommodate for that are some of the states that are really hurting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing is the base expansion into digital and into services.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that really is adding to the complexity, and I was able to actually demonstrate this when I was talking at the Kansas House of Representatives, is the sub-local tax authorities.
Mm-hmm.
All of the special purpose districts, which Colorado is famous for.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was preparing to have that meeting with Kansas, my family lives in Kansas. I know that there's a lot of different things there. Until I looked at their rate charts, I didn't realize how absurd it has become. Okay. The city that I grew up in, it's not a big city. It's a suburb of Kansas City. My parents still live there. And there are so many little sub districts that might be one block of a street, but only the odd numbers. So it's one side of the street for a block. And what is it? It's a strip mall. And so it's that. In my college town, they're building all kinds of things. There's a new entertainment district with the stadium, the football stadium that's getting rebuilt. And it's literally the addresses of every dormitory is there, and the football stadium and the basketball stadium, field house. That there's all these, and they layer on, so you will see the same address in multiple different authorities.
That's correct.
But as we were looking at it, and Kansas is a streamlined state for people that don't realize it. They have to publish this database for all of the participating technology vendors to use, and anybody can get it for free. But we found an address that was in two different districts
Mm.
that was spelled differently. The address. So it was Lane, I think it was. So it was whatever the street name, Lane. And in one of them, it was spelled out Lane. And in the other one, it was spelled LN. And so we were able to use that. Now, interestingly, we had some people from the Department of Revenue sit in on our presentation. And when we pointed that out, we kind of looked to the side to them because they were sitting behind us, and said, this is something that the department needs to fix. Because,
Yeah.
when we think about technology at its base level, it's a game of go fish, right? It's a match, character by character match.
Yeah.
Now, the bigger sales tax engines know that LANE, LN period all mean the same thing. But if
Yeah.
you're going into your own system, you've built your own shopping cart, and you're going
Mm-hmm.
to find that if your customer record is spelled LANE, is it going to
Mm-hmm.
find LN or LN period? It's not.
Mm-mm.
And so it was interesting to be able to demonstrate right there to the legislators, because one of the main reason we were originally asked to talk was because of a rate issue that was up potentially on the ballot. And so talking about how hard it is for businesses
Yes.
that may not have heavy duty technology. And a
Mm-mm.
state like Kansas, where there's a lot of rural areas, and because of Wayfair, they may be having to mail to other cities within Kansas. We didn't even say, how about of out of state businesses shipping into Kansas? We just said,
Right.
you've got a little mom and pop sitting out in a small rural town in Western Kansas, and somebody is visiting and it's too big for them to carry back. They want you to mail
Mm-hmm.
it, or it's a gift that they found,
Mm-hmm.
even somebody local, and you have to mail it. And so you're going and you're using the free Kansas database that they
Mm-hmm.
provide, but you've spelt it slightly different. And now
Mm-hmm.
you might not collect a quarter of a percent, an eighth of a percent, a half a percent that you should because of that. And then what happens? It becomes the seller's
Mm-hmm.
liability
That's right.
because
Extrapolate over 36 months.
yes, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And what a lot of people give my current hometown, Chicago, a bad rap for of, oh, you have, such a high tax rate. My city back where my parents live is a higher tax rate than I pay in the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
And it's because of all of these. I mean, Illinois, we have our transit authority and we have a water district. Those are the only two sub-level authorities that we have, in Chicago.
But they're not everywhere.
No,
Right. They're also like we have the regional transportation districts in Colorado, but it is not everywhere. So it's like,
it's hard to know
where
those.
is it? What's the
Exactly.
amoeba? What's the
Yeah.
I know. I do think it's really hard on the taxpayer
So I
for
think
sure.
those kind of the proliferation of tax authorities layered on top of the base expansion of digital and services, and particularly those
Mhm.
where we don't necessarily gather an address. And then I
Yep,
think that the last thing that goes into why it's more complicated is globalization.
for sure.
So I think all of those things have made it really more complicated for
Well, I
sellers.
just remember we had a client and they invoiced a zillion ways in Sunday because they're selling
Mm.
software. Because it was a credit card charge, so it wasn't a very high amount that
Uh,
you could buy like $15 a month or whatever it
mhm.
was. They didn't get the address.
Yeah.
So we couldn't even cite us the sale. We could
Right.
run the credit card, we got the money, but
Right.
we didn't know where the tax occurred.
Right.
So what's going to happen there? Now, fortunately, they were based in California, so California came in. They're not going to say, "Well, origination is our
Mm.
sale. Who cares?" Right?
Right.
But we're like, nobody thinks to collect the right data. They don't understand how important the data is. And as you're dealing with automation, it's character driven. It's not people driven. It doesn't
Yeah.
get to go, oh, we should look at those two things.
Right.
Oh, no, it doesn't. And so there's our problems is balancing that out
Right.
with the profile you set up even if you use technology or not. How do you set yourself up for success by gathering the right data to begin with as a
Exactly.
business?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and do you think the influx of, right? Because I think to your point, Wayfair has made people aware that sales tax can apply. Pick a time, anytime, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and there's just been kind of like an influx into the market of kind of challenging some of the longstanding traditional sales tax vendors. That's almost even making it harder for consumers or kind of tax collectors or remitters to kind of decide what they need to do, how they do, because they just are inundated with choice now.
Mhm.
While it may be less expensive than it was 30 years ago when you're spending $75,000 on an integration, custom built, all of that. Do you think that poses an additional level of challenge for some of our small to medium businesses of just trying to like, I know I have to do this thing. I Googled it. This sounds like it fits within my bucket. It sounds like it's what I need.
Mhm.
Do you think that provides another level of challenge for our tax remitters?
Absolutely. I mean, when I started in this field, we had two.
Vertex and Sovos
Well,
or
Vertex and
Taxware.
Taxware. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Taxware.
Taxware, and then when Sabrix hit the market, it was
Yep.
kind of like, oh my gosh, they turned the world upside down.
Uh-huh.
And then Avalara turned it inside out, right?
Yep.
And gave us a completely different perspective.
Yep.
And what Sabrix did when they came in, because Vertex and Taxware at the time, you basically had two data elements that you could use to make a taxability decision. And Sabrix came in and said, well, that's bogus. You need a lot more data. And so
Yeah.
they went from 2 to many, right?
Yep.
Hundreds that you could pass, and really opened it up for the ability, particularly to do consumers use tax, where you have a lot more criteria that you want to use, as well as you want to have like if then statements, right? You want to be able to
Mhm.
create conditional rules. You could do a tiny bit of a conditional rule within Vertex and Taxware initially, but not
Mhm.
not much.
Mm-mm.
Um, and and the other thing that Sabrix did was they opened it up globally, because Vertex
Yeah.
and Taxware initially, you could do Canada, but what Canada was the state, an additional state, which
Yeah.
was a little crazy. And so they said, well, why can't you use it to do VAT? And so that was something that Sabrix really did. And the third thing that Sabrix did was Vertex and Taxware at the time, was very standard pricing. Everybody paid the same amount regardless of how big they are, how much processing
Mhm.
power they needed, but it sat within your own infrastructure. So
Mhm.
you
Yeah. It's
didn't
on-prem.
it was all on prem, but if you needed it on 5 boxes, you paid for 5 licenses. So you paid
Yep.
5 times as much as somebody that maybe only needed it on 1 box, but had 20 times your volume. It was
Yep.
how your infrastructure was built. And
Yeah.
Sabrix came in, and they were the first ones that really looked at it and said, this is um, an infrastructure where you can have one tax engine and have different systems calling it, and in fact made it agnostic to what was being called from. So you could
Mhm.
use the same tax engine whether you were calling from SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, Bond, or a POS system, a point of sale
Mhm.
system. In the Vertex and Taxware, they had hundreds of flavors of their product, because it depended on the database that product was
Yes.
built on. It depended upon if it was a mainframe or an AS400, or eventually a Windows box, or different things. So they had to have all these different versions. And Sabrix said, you don't need all that. We're going to have this tax engine that's agnostic, and you can set up one set of rules for all of those, where the other ones you had to set it up on every single version that you had. It didn't talk together,
Mhm.
and God forbid if you had to take all of that onto one return, you had to do all this data accumulation to get it onto the one
Mhm.
tax return. Sabrix said,
Right.
no, don't need to do that. So that turned the industry upside down. It's what turned into what is now uh,
Thomson Reuters, one source.
well, Thomson Reuters bought Sabrix, but it turned into Vertex O Series, and
Oh, okay.
as Taxware, migrated through its various different ownership to Sovos. That it became their, at one time it was called their, like their wasn't One World. What was it called? Global Tax GTD, Global Tax Determination.
Okay.
So
I don't even remember
it
that.
became
Yeah.
their equivalent kind of what Sabrix was, and
Okay.
then Avalara came in, and Avalara, turned it, in some ways they brought the industry forward with
Mhm.
moving it to the cloud, and everything is in the cloud, where
Mhm.
our legacy systems, you could put it in the cloud, but it was not the norm. Um,
Mhm.
but Avalara, when they came, they also dumbed it down, and they
Mhm.
brought it back to the 2 data elements instead of now having multiple. And they changed the pricing model, that they said, depending upon Sabrix also changed the pricing model, but it was based kind of like on the size of the company.
Right. That's what
It was
Vertex said
revenue.
too.
It was revenue
Yes.
based. So
Yes.
the more revenue had, the more your procurement spend, the more you were going to pay in license fees.
Right.
Um, what Avalara did is they went in and, think about things like credit card processing. You pay for every click, and that's what
Mhm.
they did. Taxware, when they were owned by ADP, they were trying to go that model too, and that model fit really well with what else was happening right then, which was the beginning of streamlined sales tax. And
Mhm.
so Streamlined was going after smaller businesses. They were trying to
Mhm.
provide a solution that was cost effective for smaller businesses. And
Mhm.
back then in 2000, 2001, when all this was starting, that is who was using it. It was somebody that only needed to
Mhm.
collect tax in a couple of jurisdictions,
Yep.
had low volume. E-commerce was just at the beginning stages. So there was some e-commerce stuff that needed to be able to be solved. And so that is kind of how it happened. Well, post Wayfair world, where now we have mandatory collection by
Mhm.
very, very small sellers going down
Mhm.
globally, not just within the United States, but
Mhm.
starting focusing on the United States. We've just had such a growth in this area. Add to that private equity coming in and being able to really fund, the dot-com bubble. All of those
Mhm.
things kind of came together and proved, and the sales tax proved to be a ripe environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As streamlined required states to be more transparent, to publish content, publish their rates,
Mhm.
publish their boundary databases, make those available for free. Some of those early providers, TaxCloud, when it first started, it started
Mhm.
as one of the streamlined, certified providers.
Mhm.
TaxCloud, when it started, only provided calculation services for the
Mhm.
streamlined member states, and
Yeah.
only for the products that were defined in the agreement where they could get the tax rules for free, and that's how TaxCloud started. Today it's much easier to enter the market if
Yes.
you're a technology company, and there is so much more that's out there. So the sheer number of vendors. So we went from two to, I don't even have a current count because I keep learning about, as we were prepping for this
Mhm.
call, about a new one, and I
So what?
knew about a new one that I knew about now.
And I didn't know about the one you knew about. So
Yes,
like, holy moly. Yeah.
yeah, and we're in it every day. So
Right.
so who's winning in that? It's who has the most marketing dollars, right?
Mhm.
Who is the most memorable?
Mhm.
And what I don't like that I'm seeing is who can badmouth everybody else in the funniest way, right?
Hmm.
And I'm not going to name names, but there are some providers that are out there that all of their marketing and all of their social media posts are not about what they can do, but what their
But
competitors
who
can't,
they're not.
who they're not.
Interesting. I've seen a couple of those. I wonder, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way until you pointed it out. Negative marketing.
Very negative marketing.
But there you go, criticizing your competitor, and you can't always do it better because you may miss some things that you didn't think of. Because with software, they build minimum viable products to get to market, and then they build based on the use case.
Right. And that is where this exactly happens, Meredith, that you asked about. Are people getting into the wrong product? Yes. Why?
Yes.
Because they don't know what they need and they
Yep.
don't know what questions to ask. They are
Yep.
relying on a salesperson to come in and say, "Oh, you're in e-commerce and you use Shopify, you use Magento, you use this.
Yep.
We can solve that." But they never
Mhm.
ask, what do you sell? And oh, are you aware that you're subject to this weird battery fee in California?
Or the
And oh, we can
recycling.
cover
There's
that.
what is
Or
it? The
you're
res the res it's not the recycling fee, or maybe it is. It's like the waste fee in Washington.
yes,
Like
the
if
litter
you're within
tax.
certain the litter, yeah. Um, we were working with a pet food company, and all of a sudden they got a notice. They're like, "Hey, we didn't do this." I was like, "Well, because your pet food contributes the bag, contributes to the additional waste in the state of Washington." So it's not a lot, but it's not nothing,
Well, and
right?
it's annual. It's annual, and it's not something you collect. It just
Uh-uh.
needs to be on the return, and these providers don't necessarily know. But there's, the Colorado nightmare of the home rules. They don't know that you
I don't
have
know
to
what
be
you're
able to
talking about.
turn cities off. I've got my lovely city of Chicago personal property lease transaction
Mhm.
tax. And so there's all these little nuances that these
Mhm.
these upstarts don't necessarily know. Um,
Right.
and if one of those apply to you, and if you are an unsophisticated from a sales tax perspective retailer, you don't even know what these are. And
Mhm.
what is the saddest thing to me is these software companies say, done for you.
Yep.
Right? We handle it all, but they don't.
Mm-mm.
They'll file the returns, they'll calculate the tax, but you have to tell them what your products are. You have to know whether or not they have the right content in their database or not. And if you don't have the knowledge to know what you don't know, you're setting yourself up for problem after problem after problem, and profit loss after profit loss after profit loss.
And doing it twice. That's what we found. We spent a lot of time integrating, and we spent a couple of years reintegrating people who went alone. We're like, how'd you get this? Why'd you set this up? We have a client just recently. They somehow got set up for SUTs, but they didn't get the license with SUTs. So why did they do a SUTs thing? And this is a very small taxpayer. Like, it didn't need to do not SUTs, Streamline.
Yeah.
It didn't need to file in 17 states. It's a $5 million company. It probably isn't meeting thresholds. So they're over filing and yet under filing elsewhere and putting themselves at risk. I'm like, oh, yeah, but they don't know. They think, oh, I bought the software, it's going to fix it. And I'm like,
Right.
and I get the pushback too that some of my clients are like, well, the software company was supposed to fix it. I'm like, why would you ever got that impression?
Mm-mm.
You have to choose everything. You're the taxpayer. They only give you a tool. You have to integrate the tool yourself.
Right.
But there's this belief system somehow through the sales process that the company was going to do it, that the software company, not the business that bought it. So that's a disconnect that's kind of a mess right now. We're dealing with a lot.
I've the story just like makes me giggle in like a horrific way is, we were working with a client who is an artist, like a music artist. And one of the software vendors did their registration, but put this artist's name on a registration, their social security number on a registration. This state, can be as vague as possible, is very particular about like social security numbers, POAs, will not talk to you about anything. You were listed as an officer. They also took 9 months to issue our sales tax license and to try to call them to be like, where's our license? We had to get a power of attorney signed by this musical artist so that we could find out why we didn't have our sales tax license in 9 months.
And what they should have done was get some other responsible party to sign the document.
Correct.
And then you disclosed it, which you shouldn't have done because they're,
Yeah.
anyway, just they didn't take the deference and fiduciary duty. They didn't have a deference or fiduciary duty. That's what they don't. They just file stuff. Like they ask for questionnaire, they ask too much, and they just stick it all in the forms. And it's like that may be too much information, not necessary to a government, and you're not really protecting the taxpayer very well. You just want to get them licensed.
And they present it as a one-stop shop. And it's like, well, we can do your registrations. We can do your VDAs. We can do this. We can do this. We can do this. And it's like, do you know what you're doing behind all that?
Yeah, we got a Nexus report that was done by one of the software companies that proposed that they file VDAs that had a pretty high price tag when there was $100 of back liability.
Right.
And the client, assumed this is what I need to do. And, when we work with people like that, we're like, no, if I'm going to pitch a VDA to you, I want to make sure that I'm saving you at least what I'm charging you, or I'm protecting you from some other significant risk that you're trying to deal with. I'm never going to recommend do a VDA if there's $100, and it wasn't even like it was an extended period that we were knocking off early years that maybe didn't get calculated. It was like they got Nexus like 6 months ago and had $100 of liability. And it's like,
and the governments don't care. They don't want those taxpayers. They don't want to spend the resources to negotiate the VDA. I mean, we've had governments like no tax due, no VDA.
Well, yeah, states are starting to like establish thresholds of like, if you don't owe at least $500 or $5,000, we're not going to do a VDA. And then it's kind of like, but then you have that conversation of like, well, okay, well, what do I do though? Right. And they're just like, well, just do it this way. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to keep that one in writing for when you hopefully don't come back and get mad at me. But
because you don't know what the audit system, what's going to come back and bite you in the butt. So I think that's why the software companies make those recommendations, but they're not handling the audits. They're not handling the future returns. They're not handling that. So who cares, right? Well, we care because that's putting an inordinate cost on a taxpayer to get something they don't need to do. We don't need to overdo, right?